So today's daf is daf tet in Yoma. We're going to start on daf chet amud bet, 11 lines from the bottom. So it says, Tanya, we're talking about the Lishkat Parhedrin. Lishkat Parhedrin is the chamber where the Kohen would be isolated for the 7 days before Yom Kippur, as we've been talking about. So Tanya, it says in the Braita, Rabbi Yehuda v'chi Lishkat Parhedrin haita. So Rabbi Yehuda taught in the Braita, was it called Lishkat Parhedrin? Was this the correct name? It should say Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Was this what it was called? V'halo Lishkat Balvati haita. It was called Lishkat Balvati. Balvati is a word for a distinguished person. Okay? Rashi says Lashon Sarim, princes. Okay? So it was really called the Chamber of the Princes. Originally they called it the Chamber of the Princes. So it says, but what happened was that in the times of the Second Temple, the Bayit Sheni, the Kihuna Gedolah became very corrupt, where they would be buying it for money. And because they were buying it for money, every year the Kohen Gadol wouldn't last the year. And each Kohen Gadol was so pompous, they were all rich because they were paying for the office. So they would redo the entire chamber. They would tear it apart and redo it because, it had to be fancier than the previous guy. It had to be their own chamber. So because they were doing that, Keparhedrin halalu, like these officers that the king changes every year. Right? They're not like princes who are permanent and absolute, but these officers that change all the time. This is where it got the name Lishkat Parhedrin, because it was just like an officer's chamber, because it changed hands every year and it was renovated every year by the new person. So Tanan Hatam, we learned in the Mishnah over there, Hanachtomin lo chivu otam chachamim la'afrish ela tirumat ma'aser v'chala. It says that Nachtomin, professional bakers, in other words commercial bakeries, the Chachamim only required them to separate Tirumat Ma'aser. What is this talking about? It's talking about something called Demai. That the rabbis were concerned about average people separating the various Trumot and Masrot. So Rashi explains on the side, Halukhin tvua me'amaretz limkor pat lashuk. When the baker would purchase from an amaretz, from a regular person, from a farmer, grain that he was going to prepare into bread. So what did he do? They didn't say that out of that grain that you buy, I'm reading the Rashi, they didn't say that out of that grain that's purchased you have to take part of it to Yerushalayim as Maaser Sheni. They didn't say you had to go that far. So the concern was like this, that basically when we buy from an amaretz, when we buy from a farmer, we don't know how religious he is. Really, he's supposed to separate teruma, maaser rishon, maaser sheni. All of these maasrot are supposed to be separated from the grain. Okay, before, and terumat maaser is supposed to be separated from whatever is given to the Levi. Okay, all of these things are supposed to be done before the baker purchases it. But they knew that people were only careful about teruma. Teruma for the Kohen they were careful about, because they knew that if you eat teruma, it's a really big avera. You're not allowed to do that. So they would do that. But maaser, they said, it's not. It goes to the Levi, and it's not really so strict. And they didn't think about the terumat maaser, which is a part of the Levi's portion that goes to the Kohen also, and it's just like teruma. And they didn't separate challah, of course, because challah you only separate when you knead the dough. So what is the baker who purchases this? So what the Chachamim said was that when you buy grain from an amaretz, from a layperson, you have to separate what's called demai, extra portions of grain, just to be sure. Demai, you're not sure. Extra portion of maaser rishon, maaser sheni, tirumat maaser you have to take out, because you're not sure if it was done by the original farmer. Okay?
So if the donkey or Rabbi Pinchas would not eat because there was no demand.
Right.
But what happened if they took the truma and the master?
So this was just something to be strict. It's like if you got, it would be like, let's say you bought meat at a butcher and you don't know if they salted it or not. So you do it again just to be sure. Right? So that's what they did was they made you do it again. So then you take that, and whatever you separate out, if it's Trumat Maaser, you have to give it to the Kohen. If it's Maaser, you're allowed to keep it. as we're going to see in a second. So it says like this. So they had to separate those things. We know why they didn't have to separate Teruma Gedolah. Why not? Because the Tanya is learned in a Braita, we turn to Tet Amud Aleph, because what happened was that Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who made this principle of Dimai, of the extra taking of Maaser, he sent out people in all of Israel to check what were people actually doing. What were they actually doing? And he found that they were only separating Teruma Gedolah. They were only separating the Teruma for the Kohen. Maaser, but however, so we understand why we don't have to separate Teruma Gedolah, because even if you buy it from a regular person on the street, we assume he separated Teruma Gedolah. However, Maaser Rishon Maaser Ani Nami. Namilo. So when it comes to Maaser Rishon and Maaser Sheni, and Maaser Ani rather, when it comes to the Maaser that goes to the Levi, or the Maaser Ani, 3rd and 6th years of the Shemitah cycle, instead of separating Maaser Sheni that you have to take up to Jerusalem, you separate Maaser Ani that goes to poor people. Okay? You don't have to separate that for Demai when you're not sure. Why not? Because because the principle in halacha is that if you're going to take something away from me, you have to prove it. So since Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani are not prohibited in eating, in other words, if you give the Maaser, if I give you my Maaser Rishon for the Levi, and then you invite me to dinner, I can eat it. It's not like Teruma that only the Kohen can eat. Okay, I have to give it to you monetarily, but then once you have it, I can eat it. So what we say halachically is, since it's a doubt whether the Maaser Rishon was taken out of this food, if a Levi wants to take it, I'll say to him, prove that I didn't take it. Prove that I owe it to you. If you can't prove it, possession is 9/10 of the law, right? If you already have it, you have to prove that it doesn't belong to you. So that's the rule in halakha as well. So that's why we don't require the baker who purchased the grain from the Am Haaretz. He doesn't have to separate Maaser Ani and Maaser Rishon, because the Aniyim, the poor people, would have to prove it wasn't already taken. The Levi will have to prove. Okay? Ela Maaser Sheni nifarshu. But why don't we have to separate Maaser Sheni? V'nisko, we'll take it up to Jerusalem. V'nichluhu b'Yerushalayim. We should have to eat it in Jerusalem. Why don't we have to eat it in Jerusalem? You're not allowed to eat Maaser Sheni outside of Jerusalem. So it's not like Maaser Rishon, that it's just a monetary obligation, but once I give it to the Levi, I could eat it. Maaser Sheni, you're not allowed to eat it unless you either redeem it or take it to Jerusalem. So why aren't we concerned? Maybe the farmers who gave me this grain didn't separate Maaser Sheni, and I need to separate it. Amar Ula Ula says, Mitoch sheparhedrin halalu chovetino Kol Yud Bet Chodesh ve'omrim lahem mechru bazol. Okay, mechru bazol. Since the officers would bother the people every year and say to them, "Sell it to us for a cheap price. Sell it to us for a cheap price." Okay, so they would say mechru bazol lo atrechuhu rabbanan. The rabbis didn't require it. In other words, what does it mean? It's saying, so Rashi explains, hanachtomin, that it's talking about these bakers, that kol yud ber chodesh mishana l'shana hamimunim mitchadeshin, that every 12 months they would have new officers, new tax collectors in place. Umachbidin limto alilot ligvot mamon kishen mitchadeshin, and every new person who would come in would want to abuse the office again. Right? They would want to see what they could get. They would make the taxes higher, give us more, sell it to us for a cheaper price. So because of that, the rabbis didn't want to put any additional financial burden on the bakers, so they made it lenient for them. They said, you know what, don't separate the Maaser Sheni, you have enough problems. But what do you see from this? That my parhedrin, what are the parhedrin? Porsei. It's talking about those who are officers of the king who collect the money. Okay, so why did they bring this whole piece? Just to show you what parhedrin means. That it means officers that change every year. So just like officers change every year, they called it Lishkat Parhedrin, where the Kohen Gadol went. It was called Lishkat Parhedrin, the chamber of the Parhedrin, because he would change every year, because they never lasted. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Yochanan said, what does it mean that fear of God will increase will increase your years. Ushnot Rishayim tiktorna, it's tiktorna. So, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. Yirat Hashem tosif yamim. That fear of God will add to your days. Zeh mikdash rishon she'amad 410 shanim. Because the first Beit HaMikdash was standing 410 years, and yet velo shemishubo ele yudchet kohanim gedolim, and there were only 18 kohanim gedolim in all the 410 years, which is pretty good. That means that they lived a very long time. They didn't need to replace them very often. However, Ushnot Rishayim tiktorna, but it says that the wicked people, their years are shortened. Zeh mikdash sheni. This is the second Beit HaMikdash. Amad daled meot ve'esrim shana, which was around for 420 years, 10 years more. V'shimshu bo yoter mishlosh meot kohanim, but there were 300 kohanim gedolim. Yitzeh mehem mem shana sheshimesh Shimon HaTzadik. Subtract from those years, the 420 years, the 40 years that Shimon HaTzadik was serving, you get 380. Ushmonim sheshimesh Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and the 80 years that Yochanan the Kohen Gadol was serving, now you have 300. Eser sheshimesh Ishmael ben Pavi, then there was 10 that Ishmael ben Pavi would serve, then that brings you down to 290. V'amrela, and some say Yud Aleph sheshimesh Rabbi Elazar ben Charsom, that there were also 11 years that Rabbi Elazar ben Charsom was the Kohen Gadol. Well, that shows you already only 200 something years left. Mikan ve'elach tzeva hashov kol echad v'echad lo hotzi shnato. You see from this that none of them lived more than a year. Because how could you have 300 Kohanim Gedolim, right, minus these 4 that were around for a little bit longer, but basically you come out with less than 300 years, close to 300 Kohanim, so each one at the most was around for a year, maybe less.
They used to buy the position, they used to bribe.
Yeah, they bribed the Hashmonaim or whoever were the kings.
So who's the Rishayim?
They get in. These are what it means is that you see that that in the Bayit Rishon, in the first temple, 410 years, you have only 18 Kohanim Gedolim. That means that they lived very, very long. But in the second Beit HaMikdash, they didn't even live a year, right? Because you have 300 Kohanim Gedolim.
Except the 3 or 4.
Yeah, except for 3 or 4 of them that they lived longer. Most of them, the wicked, they were so wicked, they were all buying the position, so they only lived a year or less. So that shows you that the wickedness shortened their life.
So how come you have the first house 18 Kohanim and the second house have 310 Kohanim? So the ratio is almost 1 to 10.
What of what? Yeah, because every year they were losing a Kohen.
So what happened?
Huh?
The second temple. What happened to those Kohanim? Why?
They died. They each died in that year. Some say because they went into the Kodesh HaKodeshim on Yom Kippur. They didn't make it out, but
they call them Rishayim. That's maybe because
because they were corrupt, because they weren't really deserving. They bribed to get in. Oh. Yeah, so because they weren't deserving. Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta. Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta says that. Interesting. So he says on the side, the Bach brings an extra piece here that's missing from our Gemara that says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta v'chol kach lama. Why was it so bad? Lefi shayu lokchin ota b'damim. Because they would buy it for money. Okay, it's on the side in Hagaot HaBach. He has an extra piece here. And it says, Da'amar Rav Asi, Tarkavad dinarei, Ailale Marta bat Baitus, Lianai Malka, Ad Okme Lehoshua ben Gamla, Bekoane Rav Reve. That it says that Marta bat Baitus gave Yanai, the king, a basket full, or a tarkav is a large amount of gold dinarim, so that he would make Yehoshua ben Gamla the Kohen Gadol. And then our Gemara continues. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta mipnei macharava Shiloh. Why was Shiloh destroyed originally? Shiloh was where the Beit HaMikdash was, or where the Mishkan was in the times of Eliah Kohen, which is in the beginning of the book of Shemuel. Okay, we're going all the way back to the times of Shemuel. What was the reason why it fell apart? There were 2 averot that caused it to be destroyed. Gilui arayot ubizayon kodashim. They were having sexual immorality and disrespecting the kodashim, disrespecting the korbanot. Gilui arayot. We know that they had sexual immorality, dichtiv, because it says in the pasuk ve'eli zaken me'od v'shamayit kol asher yasun banav l'chol Yisrael, that Eli was old, very old, and he heard all that his sons were doing to the people, to the Jewish people. Ve'et asher yishkevun et hanashim atzov ve'od pedach and how they were lying down with the women who were standing outside of Ohel Moed. Now the literal meaning is that they were having affairs with these women who were coming to bring their korbanot. Now we know from the book of Shmuel, the very beginning of the book of Shmuel details how it was very corrupt. Starting in about the second chapter, right after Tfilat Chana, it details the corruption of the Bnei Eli and how they were terrorizing the people who would come for the holidays by shaking them down for money and for meat and all that, and very abusive. And this is why they are sent out; they're killed, and Shmuel becomes the spiritual leader of the Jews for quite a long time. But one of the things they would do was lying with the women. Even though we learned in Masechet Shabbat actually that Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani said that Rabbi Yochanan said that anybody says that the Bnei Eli actually had affairs with these women, eno ela to'eh, he's making a mistake. It doesn't literally mean that they had relations with these women. Mitoch shishau or shishihu et kinehen, because they caused them to delay bringing their offerings. Miha ma'aleh alehen hakatuv ki'ilu shechavum. That's it's like they were lying with them. Why? Because they delayed these women. These women were bringing korbanot for what? Because they finished being a zava, which means that they had a long period of time that they couldn't be with their husbands, or they finished being a yoledet, having given birth to a child, that they're coming, and because they made them wait, they said, listen, the korbanot that the women bring are birds. They don't give the kohen very much. They give the kohen very little. So they're not interested. They put them at the end of the line. They want the people who are bringing them oxen and the sheep, the good meat. They want good steak. They don't want these birds. So they kept them on the end of the line, and then the women would be waiting, and at the end of the day they'd say, sorry, we're closed for today. You have to sleep over and wait for tomorrow. And so by preventing them from going back to their husbands, it's like they are having relations with them. In other words, they're controlling their personal lives. Okay?
So there were sinners or no sinners?
There were sinners, but not as bad. In other words, they're saying they didn't actually have relations with them, but they prevented them from going back to their husbands, so it's similar. It's like interfering with their marriage. Bizayon Kodashim. How do we know that they were disrespecting the offerings? This is Mifurash. This is clear in the Pesukim and Sefer Shmuel. It just quotes the Pesukim to us. You don't have to have any drasha for this. The Chtiva says, "Gam b'terem yaktiruna tachelev." Before they would even put the fats of the korban on the mizbeach, which is what you're supposed to do before you eat the meat. You're supposed to put the fat on the altar. Uvad nara kohen, the helper of the kohen would come. Va'amar leisha zoveach, and he would say to the person offering, "Tena basal etzlot lekohen." Give me the meat to roast for the kohen. I don't want the cooked meat, I want it raw. Just give it to me right now. And the man would say to the lad who came to collect the meat, they would say to him, please, let them first burn the chalev, let them first burn the fats on the altar, which is what they're supposed to do first, and then you'll be able to take whatever you want, right? Give it to me right now, or I'm going to take it by force. Very nice, huh? In other words, you're supposed to wait for the korban. First, the korban goes to God, and then you take the meat for your own personal use. But these guys said, no, you give it to me now, or I'm going to take it by force. I don't care if the korban is done. And then it says, that the sin of the youths was very great before Hashem, because they were disrespecting, they were degrading the offering of Hashem. In other words, people would look at it and say, you know what this is? This is all business. It's like people who go to the synagogues that all they care about is your money, and they want the money, and they say, this is not religion, all they care about is money, how much money, what car do you drive, that kind of attitude. People would come and say, what is this Jewish religion? The Kohanim, they just want the meat. They want to take they want to take the meat, they want to take our money. It's money. That's what it's about. There's no spirituality here. And they weren't even nice about it. They were rough and violent. It was like coming to the mafia. They would pull it out of your hands. They said, forget it, we don't like this. Mikdash Rishon B'pnei Macharev. So what was the reason why the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed? We're going to get into a little bit of Agadah. So what's the reason? Mipnei Gimel Dvarim. There were three things shahayu bo. Avodah zara, v'gilui arayot u'shfichut damim. We've all heard this before. There was idolatry, there was sexual immorality, and there was bloodshed. Avodah zara dechtiv ki katzara matzah mihistareya. Because it says in Yeshayahu that the bedspread was too small to stretch out. The whole pasuk is ki katzara matzah mihistareya, that the bedspread was too small for me to stretch out on. V'hamasecha tzara hitkanes, and the frame was too narrow when I squeeze in. Hitkanes, to squeeze into. Okay, now literally what it's talking about there is that the enemies are going to swarm into Israel so much that there's not going to be enough space in Eretz Yisrael to fit all of them. Okay, but the way that the Gemara is interpreting it is that this is referring to something else. Mai katar matamistareya. What does it mean that the bedspread is too small to fit everybody? Okay, and that the frame is too short. What does it mean? Rabbi Yonatan says that this bedspread, so to speak, is too small for two friends to rule over it at once. Meaning to say that the Jews were worshipping more than one God. In other words, there's not enough here for two gods. Why do you have two gods? So saying the bedspread is too small for to stretch out is saying that we can't have two gods. We should only have one God, and they were trying to have more. They were trying to bring in other religious influences in Avodah Zarah. And it says that the frame was short to squeeze into. Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani ki matei Rabbi Yonatan haikra bachi. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says that when Rabbi Yonatan would come to this pasuk, he would cry. Amar man dechtiv bekones kaned me'ayam. That the one about whom it is written that he gathers together like in a pouch, like he gathers together the waters of the sea, like somebody would normally gather them together to drink, right? Nasid lo masechat tzara. And now an idol is made, the tzara. An idol is made his enemy. So they're interpreting this pasuk metaphorically, that when it says that the bedspread is too small, it means that this town is not big enough for the two of us, like they used to say in the old movies, right? You can't have two gods. You have to have only one God, and you're having two. And what does it mean that it was masecha? They're interpreting masecha not in meaning the bed frame, but meaning the idol. And tzara doesn't mean it's too narrow, but it means enemy. So the idol has become the enemy of God. How could it be that an idol has become the enemy of God? And that's kehit kanes, the one who gathers. In other words, Hashem gathers the waters of the sea together, and you are putting an idol as his enemy. In other words, you're giving him a competitor. How could you do that? That was one of the sins of the Jews. The other one was Gilui Arayot, sexual immorality. Dechtiv, as it says, Vayomer Hashem. Hashem says, Yan ki gavahu benot Zion. This is also from Sefer Yeshayahu in the beginning, that since the daughters of Zion are haughty, okay, vatelachna netuyot garon, and they walk with their throats stretched out, sakirot einayim, and with their eyes gesturing, haluch v'tafof, they walk in a floating way, telachna, uvraglehem te'akasna, and with their feet they put the venom into people. In other words, it means that they poison because they attract the men, right? In other words, they walk around flaunting themselves to attract the men. So what is it? How do we interpret these pesukim? So Yan ki gavu benot Zion, it says that they were very arrogant. What does it mean gavu? But it uses that literally. It says they're taller, right? But it's referring to their arrogance. But why does it say that they're taller? Shayu mehalechot arukah betzad ktsara. That the tall women would purposely walk next to a short woman so that they would be noticed more. Okay, vatelachna netuyot garon. They walk with their throats outstretched. Shayu mehalechot bekomaz kufa. They would walk with a straight back. In other words, they would walk in a very proud way. Umasakirot einayim. Their eyes would be gesturing. The havu malyan kochla in a hand. They would put a lot of makeup on their eyes to attract the men. Haluch v'tafof telachna. They would walk in a floating way. That they would walk with their heel next to their big toe. In other words, if you imagine this is a foot, so the heel next to the big toe means that they take very short steps, right? They walk very slowly, like they're walking, like they're modeling, they're trying to attract everybody's attention. Uberaglehem te'akasna. What does it mean that they would put venom or poison in with their feet? Rabbi Yitzchak says, Shayu mevi'ot mor v'afar simon. They would bring all kinds of nice smelling aromatic spices, and perfume. Umenichot b'minalehan, and they would put it into their shoes. Ukeshmegiot etzel b'chorei Yisrael, and when they would see the young men of Israel, bo'atot, they would kick their feet so that the perfume would spread out. Umatizot alehen umachnisin ben yitzhara. Right, so they would spread out their perfume when they would walk by and cause the Yetzer Hara to go into them. Ke'eres v'ka'us, just like the eres, just like the venom of a spider or of a snake would go into his victim. So what does it say here on the side? It said what karka umatizot ke'eres te'achna. Right, de'achna. So it means like the venom of coming from a reptile or whatever, a spider, a snake that is trying to poison you. So, Shefichut Damim, how do we know that in Bayit Rishon there was a problem? So far we have Avodah Zarah, we have Gilui Arayot, because we see the girls are being criticized for how they would entice the boys, and now we have the issue of Shefichut Damim. So how do we know that murder was rampant in Bayit Rishon? We know that it's a clear pasuk, because Menashe, who was one of the later kings of Yehuda, killed a lot of people, Asher Miled Yerushalayim, until the point that it filled Jerusalem pet lafeh, until it filled Jerusalem from one side to the other. In other words, it was totally full of the blood of innocent people in the times of Menashe, who was a very evil guy. So there was certainly a lot of bloodshed. But Mikdash Sheni Shayoskin Batrov Mitzvot Milon Chasadim Ibnei Charev. So then what about Bayit Sheni? We know that in Bayit Sheni, in the second temple, they were learning Torah, they were doing mitzvot, they were being Balei Chesed. So what happened in the second Beit HaMikdash? Because there was a lot of baseless hatred in Bayit Sheni, as we know. To teach you, which you see, that just the hatred that people have for one another is equal to 3 averot: Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, Shfichut Damim. Because you see that what does it take to destroy the Beit HaMikdash? Those 3 big averot: sexual immorality, idolatry, murder. And here what do we have? Just the hatred of people one to the other is enough. Risha'im hayu, they were wicked back then. Ela shetalu bitchonam behakadosh baruch hu. Even though they were wicked in the times of Bayit Rishon. Now according to the Bach, the order of this Gemara is confused because it goes from Bayit Rishon, Bayit Sheni, it keeps going back and forth. But now it's going back to Bayit Rishon. They were wicked in the times of Bayit Rishon, but they really trusted God. At'an the Mikdash Rishon. This is talking about the first Beit HaMikdash. Techtiv, as it says, Rasha b'shochad yishpotu, that the heads of the people would judge with bribery. The Chohaneh b'mchir yoru, and the Kohanim would give their piskei halacha for a price. Uneviyeha b'kesef yiksomu, and the prophets would prophesy for a price. In other words, you'd have to pay them. Ve'al Hashem yisha'anu, but they trusted God. Lemor, saying, Halo Hashem b'kirbeinu lo tavo alenu ra'ah. But they still said Hashem is with us and nothing bad is going to happen. So even though they were wicked, they still trusted God. Therefore Hashem brought upon them 3 terrible gezerot, 3 terrible consequences for their 3 sins. Therefore it says that Zion will be plowed like a field, that's number 1. And Jerusalem will be heaps of rubble, that's ayin tihye. And the Temple Mount will be bamot ya'ar, it will be like a cleared forest. All right. In other words, a decimated forest. So these three punishments were because of the 3 averot. Are you telling me that in Mikdash Rishon, in the first Beit HaMikdash, they didn't hate each other? They did all these other averot, but they loved each other. Is that really true? But doesn't it say that? Doesn't it say? And this is bringing now a pasuk from Yecheskel. Oh no, it's not Yecheskel. Is it? Oh, it's from Micha. No, the previous one was from Micha. Yeah, the previous one. No, this is from Yecheskel. Yeah, from Yecheskel. Yeah, that it says Migure el Cherev hayu etami. That it says that they were using the sword, right? So therefore, therefore you should bang on your leg. In other words, look how terrible it is that they were dwelling with the sword, right? That's literally what it means. So Va'amar Rabbi, and it should say, what's the girsa here? It's in a, let's see, Va'amar Rabbi. Where's it going? It says Eliezer there, but where is it supposed to go? It says on the top. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong place. El Azar. Okay. Why are they called Migure El Cherev? People who live with the sword. What it means to say is that these are people who will eat and drink one with another. In other words, they act all friendly towards one another. They sit around the table, they eat and drink. But as soon as they leave, they stab each other. Literally, we would say stab them in the back, right? In other words, they strike them, they pierce them with the swords in their tongues. In other words, they act all friendly, but behind their back they destroy each other. So that's in Bayit Rishon. That's in Bayit Rishon, the first temple. So what do you mean they didn't hate each other? Of course, they were saying all kinds of Lashon Hara. Answer, hi, that's talking not about the people. The common people are actually really nice back in the times of Bayit Rishon. But that is Ha'i b'Nesiyei Yisrael Havai. That's talking about the princes. In other words, the leaders did that. As it says in the beginning of that pasuk, Ze'ak ve'helel ben Adam, that cry out and wail ben Adam, talking to Yechezkel. Ki hi hayita be'ami, that this was among my people. Vitanya, and we learned in the Braita. Za'ak v'helel, it says you should cry out and wail ben adam yachol lakol. Maybe that means that everybody was doing this. No, Talmud Omar, hi bechol nesiyei Yisrael. It says that it was, because if you look at the whole pasuk, it goes like this: Za'ak v'helel ben adam, cry out and wail ben adam. That's what Hashem always calls Yechezkel. Ki hi hayta be'ami, this was amongst my people. Hi bechol nesiyei Yisrael, it was amongst all of the princes of Israel. In other words, in Bayit Sheni, the Sinat Chinam was everybody. In Bayit Rishon, it was only the politicians. Okay, the leaders hated each other and would badmouth each other.
Why people paid for it?
That wasn't the sin that they in Bayit Rishon that they suffered for, because it was for the Avodah Zarah, the Gilui Arayot, and the Shvichut Damim. That's why in Bayit Sheni they paid for it, because that was the thing that they were doing. Right? Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer Damar Tarvayu, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer were said together. Rishonim shenitgala avonam nitgala kitza. The first generations, their sin was apparent. It was revealed. In other words, it was open. People knew, we're doing idolatry, we're killing each other, we're having sexual immorality, everybody knew, so therefore, nitgala kitzam, they were also told when the end of their punishment would be. But achronim shelo nitgala avonam, lo nitgala kitzam. But the later generations, in other words, Bayit Sheni, where was the sin? It was inside, it was sinat chinam. Private. People do it privately, behind your back, or in their heart. So therefore, we weren't told when is this exile going to end, because the sin was secretive. So therefore, the end of the galut is also secretive. Hashem didn't tell anybody when we're going to be coming back. We still don't know. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Tovat Tziporin Shel Rishonim, the fingernail of the first generation was better Mikresan Shel Acharonim, from the belly of the later generations. In other words, they were greater in righteousness than the later generations. Okay? So Amar Le Reish Lakish says, Adarabba, what are you talking about? Acharonim Adife? The later ones were better. Even though nowadays we have the enslavement of the Malchuyot, we have the oppression from the non-Jewish leadership, and we're oppressed by the Romans or whomever. So but they're still learning Torah. How could you say we're worse? At least today we're learning Torah. We have Torah learning going on. Amalei said to him, Birat Tochiach. You know what? The Beit HaMikdash will show you. Because Shechazra l'Rishonim v'lo chazra l'Achronim. Because you know what? The first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, but it came back. Within 70 years it came back to those people. But the Beit HaMikdash has not come back to us. So that shows you that, and we're talking about, when Reish Lakish's time already hundreds of years, that shows you that they were better than us. Shalut Rabbi Elazar, they asked Rabbi Elazar, Rishonim Gedolim or Achronim Gedolim, who was better, the first generation or the later generation? Amar Lahem, he said, Tinu Einechem Babira, just take a look at the Beit HaMikdash. Who was fortunate enough to get the Beit HaMikdash? The earlier generation was able to regain it, we were not. Ikad Amri, some say Amar Lahem, he said to them, Edechem Bira, your witness is the Beit HaMikdash. In other words, the same idea, just different language. That the proof of who was a better generation was whether or not they were worthy of getting the Beit HaMikdash. Reish Lakish havesachi be'Yardena. Once upon a time, Reish Lakish was bathing in the Yarden. Atar Rabba Bar Brachana came. Yahev Yada, he gave him a hand. And Amar Le, he said to him, Elaha sanina lechu, that Hashem hates all of you Babylonians. Why? Because you didn't come up, Rashi explains, Lechol b'nei Bavel shelo alu b'mei Ezra, uman'u shechina milavo milashuv lishrot b'bayit sheni. That Rashi says, that it means you, people of Bavel, you didn't come up in the days of Ezra, so that the divine presence would fully return to the Beit HaMikdash, because only a small minority of the Jews actually made Aliyah for the second Beit HaMikdash. Only a small minority. So, because of you, Babylonians, he said, you stopped us from having the complete redemption in the Bayit Sheni. As it says in the pasuk, because it says in Shir HaShirim, if she is a wall, meaning if the Jewish people are like a wall, I will build upon it what's the word I'm looking for? Tower of silver, right? And if she is a door, then I will make a plate of cedar panel, not plate. That's what I was looking for, right? A panel of cedar. So what does that mean? What does the pasuk mean? If you had been like a wall, and you would all come up in the days of Ezra, then you would have been like kesef. You would have been like silver, which doesn't rot. But now you came up like doors, meaning doors, part is open, part is closed. In other words, it wasn't a full aliyah. It wasn't a full, right, they didn't come together. You became like wood, a cedar panel that it can rot. So therefore, because if they had come up all together in the times of Bayit Sheni, everyone had made aliyah, everybody had come back, then you would have had a permanent reintroduction of the Shekhinah in Israel. But since only a small amount came, they were like doors. One stays closed, one opens. In other words, it was only a partial, half-hearted aliyah. They didn't get it.
People in Galut right now to go Israel?
Everybody reading this in Israel today in Daf Yomi is probably saying, look at how all those American Jews are ruining our chances, right? Because I see this. Yep. My erez, what does it mean erez? So Amar Ula says, Sasmigur. My Sasmigur. What does Sasmigur mean? Sasmigur means something which is right. What it means is that a worm that would eat away at the wood. Okay, that would waste it away. So Rashi explains mikzato tolat ochalto mitocho umikzato kayam, that so kach ktzat chazon shechina yasham v'kulo lo haya. In other words, in the times of Bayit Sheni, they had a partial revelation of Hashem's presence, but not a complete one. Just like a wood that's eaten away on the inside by worms, but looks on the outside like it's good. So there was something there, but not enough. It wasn't enough. So what does it mean that they had partial divine revelation then? Rabbi Abba said that it means bat kol. They had a divine voice that would sometimes come out and reveal things to them, but they didn't have a full nivu'ah. They didn't have a full kind of a prophecy. And why didn't they have full prophecy? Because everybody didn't come up in the times of Bayit Sheni. Only a small amount came. When the last prophets died, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Nistalkaru HaKodesh Misrael, there was no more divine influence. In other words, there was no more prophecy in Israel. But they still had bat kol. They still had a divine voice that would occasionally come out and reveal itself to them. Okay? Is it really true that Reish Lakish had a conversation with Rabba Bar Chana? That's very unlikely. Rabba Bar Chana didn't talk to many people because because it says Umay, and who should it say here? Umay El Azar Demara Arad Yisrael Havavlah Mishta'e Reish Lakish Bahadeh. If we know that Rabbi Elazar, who was the leader of Israel, and Reish Lakish would not talk to him, right? Reish Lakish didn't have conversations with people. Okay? He wouldn't talk to anybody. Because anybody that Reish Lakish would talk to, Bashuk, Yavule Iska, Below Sahadeh. Because Reish Lakish had he was viewed, it's very interesting, because Reish Lakish was actually originally a thief. He was originally a robber, and the famous story is that Rabbi Yochanan finds him and says, "Wow, with the energy you have, you could be the greatest Talmid Chacham, and you could be amazing." And he becomes a Talmid Chacham, right? But Reish Lakish was so careful after that. It seems maybe that was connected, because he did teshuvah for his evil ways. He was so careful about with whom he would associate, meaning that he wouldn't talk to anybody in the shuk. He wouldn't talk to anybody in public, because if they saw Reish Lakish talking to somebody, they said, "Oh, he must be trustworthy. I can give him iska belo sahadeh. I can give him business without any witnesses." In other words, he must have integrity. If Reish Lakish talks to him, he must be a good guy. I'm going to trust him. It's like today, if a politician is photographed talking to some bad guy, they say, "Oh, look, he was photographed with this bad guy. He must be bad." Right? By association. So the opposite with Reish Lakish. If he talked to Maurice, somebody sees him talk to Maurice, they say, "Oh, I can give Maurice money to do business and I don't have to have any contract, that I can trust him." That may be true about Maurice, but that's not true about everybody. Right? You have to know. So Reish Lakish didn't want to give anybody the false impression by talking to them. So he wouldn't even talk to Rabbi Elazar, who was the leader of Eretz Yisrael. So certainly to Rabbi Bar Chana he wouldn't talk. So how can we have this? So Amar Rav Papa says, Shadeh Gavra Benaihu. We have to change some part of the story then. Oh, Resh Lakish hava uzeiri. Either it was Resh Lakish talking to Zeiri, because that was somebody that he would talk with. Okay? Or Rabbi Bar Chana hava v'Rebbi Elazar. Or it was Rabbi Bar Chana and he was talking to Rebbe Elazar. So we have to change one of the people in the story. Either it wasn't Resh Lakish in the water. It was actually Rebbe Elazar in the water, and Rabbi Bar Chana came. Or it was Resh Lakish and it was Zeiri, who was one of the people that apparently Resh Lakish would in fact talk to. Ki atal lekamed Rabbi Yochanan. When he came to Rabbi Yochanan, Amar le, he said, Lav hainu ta'ama. Isn't this the reason? In other words, when Resh Lakish later came and he said, is this in fact the reason why there was no Shekhinah in Israel in the times of Bayit Sheni? It was because everybody didn't come up. So it should say that he responded to him. It should say, Di'i nami saliku. Oh, I see. When Resh Lakish came to Rabbi Yochanan and reported to him what he heard, then he said, Amar le, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Lav hainu ta'ama. That's not the reason. Di'i nami saliku kulo b'mei Ezra. Even if they had all come up in the days of Ezra, lo havashar yeshachida b'mikdash sheni, they still would not have had a full expression of the Shekhinah in Bayit Sheni. Dichtiv yaft Elohim la'yefet v'yishkon ba'ol Hashem, because it says Hashem will expand the Yefet and He will dwell in the tent of Shem. So af al gav the yaft Elohim la'yefet, even though Hashem has expanded Yefet, which is talking about the Persians here, en Shekhinah shora ela be'ahol Hashem. The Shekhinah will only rest in the tents of Shem. So Rashi explains, shezachu parsim livnot bayit sheni. The Persians had the zechut of building, the merit of building a second temple, and Shekhinah shora ela b'mikdash rishon shebana shelamo sheba mizar oshel Shem. But only a building that was constructed by somebody from Shem, from Shlomo HaMelech, who came from Shem, only that place would be able to have the Shekhinah. Meaning that in the future, Bayit Shlishi must be built by the Jewish people if it will have a full expression of Shekhinah, of divine presence, because the fact that the building was constructed by Persians meant that it wasn't capable of having the full manifestation of Shekhinah.